Welcome to Sustainability Now, an exploration of technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. Designed for socially conscious entrepreneurs and individuals interested in responsible stewardship of the planet. Sustainability Now covers food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Mira Rubin.
Welcome, everybody, to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. I'm your host, Mira Rubin, and I'm delighted to introduce Andrew Cameron Bailey. Andrew was born in England and grew up in Durban, South Africa, where he studied the arts, sciences, anthropology, and comparative religion, and lectured in mathematics and chemistry. After the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, he assembled a core team and began developing an integrated response solution to the climate crisis. The team has developed a number of innovative strategies and inventions, including the Enviroplex, the EnviroFarm, the carbon capture module, and the Bailey Synergy Tower. Andrew, welcome. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Hey, Mira, thanks. This is an honor and a treat, really. I think this is important, and it's a kind of critical time in our species' history. Here we are.
Exactly. So speaking of critical timing, we are in the throes of the COVID-19 virus, and people are in sequestration. We are each isolating, and actually, thankfully, so far it's not martial law. It's not being outwardly enforced, except in certain cities. So this is an unprecedented time, and there's lots of very confusing emotions happening from minute to minute, news happening from minute to minute, and we're here to bring hopeful news of a really timely solution, and also to talk about potential upsides to this whole viral outbreak, right?
Yeah, so I'm speaking to you from lockdown in the foothills of the Colorado Rocky Mountains. We're on Sunrise Ranch, this intentional community here, and I happen to be part of the media team. And what's rather wonderful about this, instead of just being confined to our apartment or our house or our home, we actually have an entire broadcast studio available to us. So we're doing an awful lot of communicating, doing a lot of Zoom calls such as this one. And God, it seems like every 3 hours we're on another call with another group of people. Quite extraordinary. And the one thing I want to say about this coronavirus pandemic, it is indeed serious. There's no question about it. What's interesting, though, it has forced humanity to slow down, to stop its frenetic death wish, if you will, something like that. We've been just racing to, if you really look from the climate standpoint, we've been racing toward extinction. We're just determined to make as much money as possible before everybody dies. Can I express it that ridiculously? But it's that ridiculous. So what we're seeing is blue skies over Wuhan, China, that people are looking up and saying, oh my God, clouds, skies. They've seen nothing but smog and foul, filthy industrial emissions for however many decades. The people are saying, what's that sound? And the sound is birds. They haven't heard birds because of the roar of industry. These to me are just, they just hit me right in the heart as far as the universe is always in perfect balance. I have this ridiculous saying that the worse it looks, the better it is. And I'm sticking to that story.
That's an interesting paradox. And actually, I think it's a wonderful concept for us to explore internally and externally with each other. The thing that I am purporting at this time is that we are as good as the questions we ask. And the question of the day is, what is the opportunity? What are the possibilities that we can birth in this very, very unusual moment in time.
Yeah. So one of the great sayings, and Peter Diamandis is the guy who's been saying it lately, but it's not new, and it is this: the world's greatest problems are also the world's greatest opportunities. Now, I don't know what that means in terms of the coronavirus, but I do know what it means in terms of climate. At Davos this year, at the World Economic Forum, just back a month ago, it was realized that climate restoration presents a multi-trillion-dollar investment opportunity. That's being recognized at the highest level of finance on this planet. That's interesting. As someone who's engaged in that, who has seen that it's unlikely that philanthropy is big enough to solve the problem. It seems unlikely that governments are going to be motivated to solve the problem. That private enterprise can in fact step up and make a whole lot of money doing a whole lot of good. And I think that's a winning formula.
No question. Andrew, I am going to ask you, though, to back up a little bit, because you mentioned climate restoration. And I think that that's probably a very unfamiliar term to most of the folks that are listening to this broadcast. So maybe you can just give us some context for what exactly does that mean?
So think about that. 2 words, climate. If I say the word climate these days, most people think climate change or they think global warming. If I say climate restoration, and this happened to me a number of times at conferences, at climate conferences, I'd use the term climate restoration and I'd get a blank stare because people couldn't put the word climate together with the word restoration. But all that means is to restore the climate. That is, in fact, the job we have to do. If we do not restore Earth's climate, we're in very big trouble, and our children and our grandchildren are going to be facing a nightmare, quite honestly.
I think that concept in and of itself is so novel. You said people have dissonance when they're trying to put those 2 words together. How do we restore it? I know that so much of our focus has been on stopping the progression and the worsening of the climate, but to actually restore the climate, that's a new idea.
That is the amazing, inspiring, challenging job that lies before us, Mira. So I think I can speak pretty eloquently on what we have to do and how we have to do it and how we're going to make money doing it and how it's actually going to be fun, because what could be more fun than rising to a challenge in community with confidence and rising up and doing it? So back to climate restoration. What is climate restoration? It is the endeavor to return Earth's atmosphere to the condition it was in before the Industrial Revolution. 300 parts per million of CO2 or less. That is a proven safe level. It's the level in which our species evolved and developed on this planet. We know that works. We also know that the current level of something like 415 to 420 average parts per million in Earth's atmosphere is far too much. Throughout the last, we have ice core records from the last 420,000 years. And you can see these cycles, you can see the ice ages, and you can see that the highest CO2 levels ever went was about 300 parts per million. 280 is a nice average. And it would go down to about 200 and bounce back up to 300. It never went above 300. Now we're at 420. And we're only beginning to see the consequences of a level of CO2 that high. It's not something that this system on this planet, this very dynamic, very shifting, very changeable system, it's not something that this planet can sustain. So as a result of that, as I'm sure all of our listeners know, we're losing the Arctic sea ice. We're losing the Antarctic ice. We're having weird, extreme weather patterns. The climate has already changed, and we are already in very big trouble. The ocean has begun to rise. We're seeing that very clearly. And the scary thing, perhaps, is that this has been predicted for a long time. We first knew about CO2 and greenhouse gases about 100 years ago, literally 100 years ago, back in the late 1800s, more than 100 years ago. And we have done nothing about it. And we've done all these simulations, all these computer projections of what's going to happen. And in every single case, reality has exceeded the projections. If we said something would happen in 10 years, it happened in 5 years. If we said something would happen in 50 years, it would happen in 10 years. And here we are in an accelerating feedback loop that every time it gets hotter and drier, we get more fires. And every time we get more fires, the fires pump more CO2 up into the atmosphere, which just accelerates the planet getting hotter and drier. The recent fires in Australia are an incredible, terrifying example of what we're looking at. I've personally been out with friends in Malibu, friends who managed to save their home in the midst of all of their neighbors burning down. And they saved their home despite the fact that the electricity was switched off and the fire department stood down, and they were told to leave and they refused to leave. And they had a pond, and they took buckets of water from the pond and put out these little burning bushes that would have ignited the trees and burnt the house down, and they saved their property. And they tried to save their neighbor's property, but the gates were locked and they couldn't get in, they couldn't do anything. So helplessly, they had to watch these crazy tornadoes of fire. And however, they came through it. I went out there and I'm a filmmaker. I went and interviewed folks out there in the midst of that devastation. And that's year before last, extraordinary.
I have to ask you, just because there's a group of people that are environmentally oriented that have the belief that the climate change that is not a result of human activity, that it's a cycle that happens over millions of years and that it's a natural cycle. And I just want to bring that forward so that we've addressed what might be an elephant in the room.
So this in fact is true. Over cycles of millions of years, we can go back again through ice cores, and we can see that we do know that there was a time when the carbon dioxide levels on this planet were about 1,000 parts per million. And there were no humans, and there were no mammals, and there were no birds, because it was only suitable for algae. And the algae did very well until the algae actually self-destructed by putting out all this poisonous stuff called oxygen. And once the oxygen exceeded the CO2 in the atmosphere, and we reached an atmosphere similar to what we have evolved in, our species and all of the other species that we know and love were able to come to fruition on planet Earth. So yes, it's true, there are these long-term cycles. There are also the much shorter-term cycles that I was just mentioning. Over the last 420,000 years, we've had, I'm not sure how many, 15 or 17 different ice ages. So there's this fluctuation that happens about every 90,000 years. It is a natural cycle. It has something to do with the wobble of Earth's atmosphere relative to the sun. When the North Pole is further away from the sun, we experience a cooling. When the North Pole is closer to the sun, we experience a warming. However, historically, CO2 levels have never been above roughly 300 parts per million. And
while human beings have been on the planet.
420,000 years. So I don't know how long human beings. I personally think, I've done a major study on the subject, I think we've been on this planet for about 200,000 years. So correct. In the last 420,000 years, we had hominids, we had possibly humans. I honestly don't know. I think modern humans came into being around 200,000 years ago. But the important point is that the parallel that is undeniable is that carbon dioxide began to increase in Earth's atmosphere at exactly the time of the Industrial Revolution. And we started to burn all of this coal and then all this oil and all this natural gas, and to continue to do that in ever increasing amounts up to the very present moment until we actually put the brakes on as a result of this current pandemic. And there's no question that there's a whole lot more CO2 in Earth's atmosphere than there has been in the last 420,000 years. That is a fact, a scientific fact. So now, and it would seem incontrovertible that the Industrial Revolution had a lot to do with that. It's the only thing that's different, is we've got humans burning all this coal.
Hi, this is Scott, co-founder of Sustainability Now. I wanted to remind you that resources and links related to this episode can be found on our website, sustainabilitynow.global. While you're there, consider signing up for a monthly membership to help us keep the show going. This year, we will be adding live events, long-form reporting, and interactive content. We started Sustainability Now as a passion project, and until this point, we've been completely self-funded. Your contribution will ensure that we can continue to build community, inspire hope, and share solutions. Thanks, and remember that together we can shape a world that works.
And then we have this phenomenon called the greenhouse effect. I was on a panel in Los Angeles just back in February, and there was a scientist on that panel saying that humans have nothing to do with global warming, that it's a natural cycle and it goes on and up and down and in and out. And he said we're actually in a cooling cycle. That's a tricky thing to be stating in a world that is seeing the hottest temperatures. I mean, that was in February, and January had the hottest temperatures on record since we started keeping records. So there's a lot of controversy, there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of misunderstanding, but I would say that it's something like 97% of scientists on this planet, including our group, which is about 100 climate scientists and engineers and people in our Healthy Climate Alliance. There's nobody there who's saying that the greenhouse effect is not real and that increased CO2 and methane and other pollutants in the atmosphere do not contribute to the warming of planet Earth. So that, from my perspective, is a given fact. And anybody wants to deny that, well, there are groups of people who call themselves climate deniers. I personally think they're wrong. I know people who think the world is flat. They really do. I have a good friend whose kids and herself now believe that Earth is in fact flat, and it's a conspiracy that pretends that the Earth is round. Okay, I'd love to see you prove that. They have, it's quite extraordinary. So it's been, the whole thing's been politicized, which is insane. This is a human challenge, a human problem. We have a situation. We have too much CO2 in Earth's atmosphere. And one of the things we can ask ourselves is, well, if we've put all that CO2 into Earth's atmosphere, is it possible to remove it? If we could remove enough carbon dioxide from Earth's atmosphere, would that help to reset the climate? And honestly, we don't know because nobody's ever done that. Right. We do know that it's possible. We do know that technologically, scientifically, it is entirely doable. We don't know how effective it will be. We don't know how much it's going to take to do that. But personally, I believe that we absolutely must do that. So there are actually three fundamental things, Mira, that we absolutely must do. Number one is we must stop burning fossil fuels. We simply have to do that. We have to wake up and stop. And we're seeing the change with just this brief stop that's happening right now with the coronavirus. China is all of a sudden putting out a whole lot less pollutants into the atmosphere, and you can see it from NASA. You can actually see it from space. It is possible to change things very rapidly as far as current emissions. If we could stop emitting today, however, we are still at 415 to 420 parts per million globally. That does not go away. The CO2 in the atmosphere stays there for an estimated 1,000 years.
Right.
Methane only stays there for 10 or 15 years, but it's an 84 times stronger greenhouse gas than CO2. So methane too is a huge problem. And as the permafrost melts up in the Arctic and in the on the Siberian continental shelf, where it's bubbling off as we speak, that is a terrifying situation that's going on. How the hell are we going to stop the permafrost melt in the Arctic and stop that methane from entering Earth's atmosphere? Big question. So point being, we must stop emissions, period. We have to do that. That's going to have to be by government edict. And so far, the governments of the world seem to be on the opposite camp. They want to just crank out as much as possible to support the fossil fuel industry and to keep this frenetic madness going that has put us where we are. So that's the first thing we have to do. And I personally can't really contribute to that. I have to trust that humans will wake up in time to do that. Secondly, we must remove as much of the excess carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere as humanly possible. And by humanly possible, I mean that literally our species can wake up and fire up and get the job done, much as when Kennedy said, we're going to put a man on the moon and we're going to bring him home safely back in the 60s. 1960, Kennedy made that announcement, and we did that. So it's what is known as a moonshot. The future King of England, Prince William, just started a fund. He's putting 500 million pounds into a fund called Earthshot. And I love that.
Oh,
So
that's beautiful.
people are beginning to fire up on these very high levels. Jeff Bezos from Amazon has just said, I'm going to put $10 billion into climate restoration, essentially, as people realize that this is the term for what we are, what we have to do. It's the actual term for the job we must do. So we have to pull as much CO2 out of Earth's atmosphere as we can, as quickly as we can. There's an estimated 1 trillion tons of excess CO2 in Earth's atmosphere. Think about that. Think about it from the standpoint of, oh, I'm a miner. I'm going to go mining in the sky, in the atmosphere, and I have a resource that's absolutely free, and I don't have to dig into the ground, and I don't have to go to the moon. It's right here, right now. And if I can suck gigatons, that's billions of tons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, that should be a good thing for Mother Earth. Secondly, if I can take that carbon dioxide and instead of spending a fortune sequestering it thousands of feet down under Earth's crust, if I can convert that into usable, marketable products and make not just an industry, but an entire cluster of brand new industries out of the existing CO2 in the atmosphere, then we have a winning formula. If we can get billions of tons of carbon out of the atmosphere and turn that into, and I'll give you a very short list of what we can do, and it's not a complete list. Concrete. Concrete consists largely of limestone. Limestone is calcium carbonate. We can make calcium carbonate from the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it forms a perfect aggregate for concrete production. And concrete is the thing, tonnage-wise, that humans produce and use more than any other single thing. Secondly, we could, let's say carbon. We've all heard of carbon fiber. What if we could replace the steel and the aluminum industries with carbon fiber composite materials and 3D print anything we can dream of? Now, right now, 3D printing in carbon fiber is expensive, but that's because it's a technology that's in its infancy. Once it goes to scale, we're going to be able to do that very affordably. We can literally replace the concrete, steel, and aluminum industries with carbon from Earth's atmosphere, and that changes everything. It's an extraordinary vision. And I can, anybody who's interested, I can send you a recent article by Peter Diamandis, a great business thinker.
You know what we'll do is we'll put a link to the article. If you'll provide me with the article,
I will do that.
We'll put a link at sustainabilitynow.global so that people can access it.
So, you know, I've been talking this stuff for about 5 years now, and Peter Diamandis just got on board with it about not even 4 or 5 months ago. And he is one of the most influential business people on the planet. And now this whole subject came up at Davos in Switzerland at the World Economic Forum back in February. So this is not pie in the sky. This is real. It's new. So we have to develop and invent systems, and that's precisely what I've been doing with my team for these last 5 years. And so I'm just plain excited. Yes.
I'm sorry, just as you're saying you're excited, it is exciting. You're a genius to have put together what we're going to talk about in a minute. I just want to back up for a second, because with all this carbon in the atmosphere, why are we talking just about climate? Why are we not talking about air quality? Why are we not talking about the impact of that air on all the life forms on the planet?
All the humans who die as a result of pollution every year, and it's in the millions.
I don't understand why that isn't part of the conversation, because frankly, even if it didn't reverse the climate change, we would all be so much better off if we were able to remove that carbon from the atmosphere.
Right. And I also one of our affiliates has an agricultural technology that basically replaces Monsanto, replaces the entire agrochemical paradigm, and prevents huge amounts of agriculturally produced pollutants going into the atmosphere, going to the rivers and the creeks and the streams, causing these algae blooms, on and on and on. And the food that we're forced to eat that is produced in this chemical industrial way is not food, it's fake food. It's just
dangerous food.
It's
actually.
nutrient-free food. How about, do I want to feed my children nutrient-free food with things like glyphosate in it?
Right.
It's terrifying how far we've gone down this, I can't help regarding as the wrong road. We've gone a long way down the wrong road.
Yes.
And we can do a U-turn and change it and wake up. I'm
Yes.
here, I'm speaking to you from basically Boulder, Colorado, in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. It's one of the most beautiful places in the country. The air quality is abysmal. We have the Great Plains, and the Great Plains are full of cattle production, all of these, what do they call them? These confined animal feeding operations, these feedlots. When the wind comes from the plains, you can smell it from here. It's absolutely beautiful. You can smell it. And there's these fumes drifting across the plains. And then, of course, we have the large city of Denver, and we have Denver International Airport. And the air quality here is honestly disgusting. I was just in Los Angeles. The air quality was like back in 1973, really, really disgusting. I was just in Las Vegas. I was taking photographs of pollution just to show what it looks like. You can barely see the buildings.
Yeah.
Really, really disgusting.
Yeah. I find it quite remarkable. Years ago, we talked a lot about pollution, and now we talk about climate, and there's not been so much conversation about pollution. And I wonder, is it because it's become such a baseline for people? It makes no sense that we're not up in arms about it.
Yeah. I think we thought we had it. We really did. We passed through legislation. We took a lot of moves we had the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act.
Totally gone.
And the current administration seems determined to erase all of that.
Exactly.
Just go all the way back. It's the only thing that has value is that which makes money for people who are already rich. And that's not a good formula for Mother Earth. I'm sorry. It doesn't work.
No, it's not a formula for sustainability globally at all.
And let me I mentioned that there are three things that we must do as humans to solve this climate crisis. And the third one is a real challenge. And it's not one, again, that I personally can engage in. So number one is stop emitting pollution into the atmosphere. Secondly, start removing as much CO2 from Earth's atmosphere as we possibly can. And thirdly, believe it or not, we have to refreeze the Arctic. Now,
how do we do that?
That's a serious question. I'm on a call every Saturday with a group of people who are absolutely committed to doing that. It's a principal project of the Healthy Climate Alliance and of the Foundation for Climate Restoration. These are existing groups of scientists who are developing these things. We're involved with Cambridge University, a lot of other academics. And how do we refreeze the Arctic? A number of proposals. And I think I won't go into them in detail. I have one that I really like. It actually, my brother's idea. I have a brilliant kid brother who's just amazing. And he says, well, what if we put up a shade device like an umbrella in space? Because the problem is too much solar radiation. See, the answer is something called solar radiation management, SRM, solar radiation management. If you're getting too much radiation, what do you do if you're out in the desert and it's 120 degrees and the sun's blazing down? You put a hat on, or you put up a brolly, right, an umbrella. You get into the shade. Once you're in the shade, it's different. And we could shade the Arctic very, very easily, very affordably, simply by putting a space umbrella, probably some kind of Mylar system that could be remote controlled from NASA or from the Earth. And we could do that so easily. It's a whole lot easier and infinitely cheaper than putting somebody on the moon or building a space station. We can do this with our current technology. And the minute you get control of the amount of radiation hitting the Arctic, you can actually let the ice restoration begin. Then there are a whole bunch of more technical, more technological, harder to understand possibilities. And I think I just won't go into, it's not my field, but we just had a conference, a major conference, September 17th last year at the United Nations. This subject was discussed in detail. We had about 300 to 400 people. It was called the first annual United Nations Forum on Climate Restoration. We initiated that, and it's going to be annual. So the next one will be this coming September.
Well, you know, you mentioned your friend who has a solution for the waste from livestock production. And actually, one of the things that we didn't say is the animals themselves are living in horrific conditions. They're treated abysmally, and that too needs to change. And the waste, the animal waste, has been a huge crisis. I remember when there were floods in North and South Carolina, and there were pig farms, and the sludge from the pigs was incredibly toxic, and there was all kinds of runoff, and it created a serious health threat for people in the vicinity. So to have a solution for that is amazing. So tell us about that.
For that, the solution goes back to the mid-1980s when it was first patented by a man named William Tooley, Bill Tooley, and his brother. And his brother TJ, bless him, he's passed on now. And they developed a system. See, there's no such thing in the universe as waste. This is our problem as humans. We think there's something called waste. Waste is something we haven't figured out how to use yet. The excess CO2 in the atmosphere, you could say it's waste. I've just been saying, wait a minute, it's a resource. As a miner, give me that trillion tons of carbon, and I'll turn that into $1 trillion. How do you like that? That's actually something we can do. Every one of those tons can become at least $1 worth, for heaven's sake. I think it can become $1,000 worth or more. As far as the waste, livestock waste, currently kept in so-called manure lagoons throughout the country and actually throughout the world, and with hog farming tremendously so, as you just mentioned, in the Carolinas, especially North Carolina. North Carolina has the highest population of hogs in the country, and those hogs put out this stinky, smelly stuff that ends up in these open pits, these lagoons, so-called. And when you get a hurricane, such as happened about, how long ago was that? About 16 months ago, I think it was, where this pig waste is washing through the streets and the towns and presents a huge health hazard. We have a total, complete, immediate, profitable solution to that, because that waste is not waste. That waste is actually organic fertilizer in waiting. It's not yet. Raw manure is not fertilizer. It is not good. You can't spray it directly on crops. It stinks. It's horrific. We cannot do that. But what Bill Tooley has developed is a technology, and it's just helping nature to do what nature does, namely to process it. So in a way, it's a manure refinery. It's called the EnviroCirculator, and it's simply a floating propeller system that floats in. I can again show you, I've made films on the subject. We have 32 farms in the Midwest using the system right now. I've interviewed the families, and the first thing that goes away is the stench. The second thing that goes away is the brown color of this stuff, and it becomes pure. It looks like water. You look down into it and you can see about 6 or 7 feet down, and I expect to see fish swimming by. And it is actually organic fertilizer that this can be sprayed on crops. Now this can be delivered subsurface by drip irrigation. It's called fertigation, where you fertilize the roots of your crops right at the time when the plants need it, as opposed to the current paradigm, which is to dump a whole bunch of chemicals on the surface in November, and the winter rains and snows come and the floods come and it washes off and ends up in the creeks and the rivers and causes the algae blooms, et cetera, et cetera. It's a ridiculous, expensive, and unsustainable technology that current farmers are forced to use because the alternative is not. It is available. They want to do it, but they cannot afford it. So Bill Tooley's technology has not been scalable so far. He did receive a USDA grant of $2.4 million, a CIG, which is a Conservation Innovation Grant. And they did an experiment. They did installations on 11 farms, totally successful. Those 11 farms received these systems for free and were therefore able to do it. The banks will not lend on an untried, so-called unproved technology. This technology is totally proved.
So this experiment now, was it enough to convince the banks to be able to fund?
You know, amazingly, no, it's ridiculous. So this is, Bill Tooley and I are colleagues. We're partners in this. So the EnviroFlex is a combination of his technology and my carbon capture technology.
Okay, well, let's wait a second, because I want to make a solid segue to that so
Okay.
that we understand. Like, let's just wrap up with Bill's technology. What I'd like to do is include some links, photographs and such on our website. You can provide us with stuff that we can put there.
In fact, you can go to my website. I sent you that yesterday.
Yep.
Straight to that. I showed you that when we were looking at it.
Yeah.
There's that little film. There's a little 5-minute film I made that tells the story pretty darn well.
Okay, so I want everybody that's listening to know that if you go to sustainabilitynow.global, we will have links to Andrew's site, and you will be able to see more about these wonderful technologies that he's speaking about and see what they look like. We may even post some images on our site. So now you're talking about the Enviroplex, and this Enviroplex is your innovation. Let's talk about that and how it integrates Bill's technology as well.
All right. So the Enviroplex, as the name implies, is sort of like a complex building, an integrated building that uses environmental technologies existing. There's nothing new in anything that I am doing here. What we are doing is integrating existing, well-tested technologies that we can show happening in other circumstances, including these 32 farms in the Midwest, for example, integrating them into a coherent system that can be rapidly installed and deployed and put to work in a single location very, very easily. And we do know that in order to make a difference to Earth's climate, we've got to do this not just in one location, but in multiple locations. So from the get-go, from the ground up, these buildings, these systems are designed to be mass producible. We have to be able to just crank them out, and we're not going to build them here in Colorado and ship them to Tokyo. That would be ridiculous. The only thing we're going to ship to Tokyo is a digital file with all of the design specifications, and they will be created and built and installed over there. And
so let's back up a little bit and talk about what the function of the Enviroplex is. What brought it forward for you?
Okay, so it all started with me meeting Bill Tooley about 6 years ago now, and starting to talk about his technology. And I learned what he was doing. I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. This is huge. This is game changing. I think I can help you. And I have a number of connections to people with serious amounts of money. And I said, oh, I'm going to be able to bring him some serious backing, because the only missing element in his business model is trying to sell something to farmers who cannot afford it and the banks won't lend on it. So we need independent investors who can get the picture and realize the profit potential and join in, right? That's how it began. Then as I endeavored to do that, and to be honest, I can't believe it, but I've not succeeded. You would think that would be a no-brainer. I would have been able to bring money to Bill's company and we'd all be thriving by now. Not the case. Aside from the USDA and a number of, as I said, there are 32 farms, so there's 20 farmers, 20 farmer families who have made the change. So that's a fact, and it's in existence right now in 5 or 6 states in the American Midwest. At the same time, I began looking at the CO2 in the atmosphere. I was trained as a chemist. I was a chemical engineer, and I looked at the CO2 situation in Earth's atmosphere and said, well, one of the first things I learned as a 14-year-old when I first encountered chemistry was that if you take carbon dioxide and you have this canister of CO2 and you bubble it through a solution of not of water, but of water containing something such as a dilute solution of an alkali. Let's take sodium hydroxide, caustic soda. If you bubble CO2 through a solution of sodium hydroxide contained in a beaker, if you watch what those bubbles do, they never reach the surface, because as they rise, they get smaller and smaller and smaller, and they completely disappear before they break surface. And the reason for that is there's a chemical reaction going on, and the CO2 is being converted into sodium bicarbonate, also known as baking soda, So that's the basic technology I looked at and said, what if we took the air and bubbled air through a dilute solution of sodium hydroxide, for example? There are many other chemistries, but just to take that one example. We would capture the CO2, we'd remove 100% of the CO2 in the air that passed through the system, and we would now have a whole lot of sodium bicarbonate, which does not cause global warming. How would that be? Can we do?
And it does miracles for cleaning and all kinds of other things.
Right. Now, I think the market for sodium bicarbonate was captured a long time ago by, what's that company's name, Arm & Hammer. You find them in everybody's refrigerators and so on. But the fact is that sodium bicarbonate is what is called a precursor in industry. It's something that you can turn into something else. So we can take that sodium bicarbonate. You can go to the supermarket and buy some sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda. You can convert that into fuel. You can convert that into carbon fiber materials. There's so many things you can do with it if you know the chemistry. And the chemistry is simple. I literally knew it when I was 14 years old. I got all excited about chemistry when I was 14. And I had this amazing teacher who I still love and revere to this day. And I became a chemist as a result of an inspiring teacher. So taking that very simple ancient technology that can't be patented, it's in the public domain, it's just nature, and using a process, that exact process or a process much like it. If I wanted to make limestone, which is calcium carbonate, I would use a calcium product instead of a sodium one. There's a Bill Gates funded operation in Canada right now that's using a potassium hydroxide based one. It's a lot more toxic, but they are successfully removing CO2 from the atmosphere. My problem with that operation and most of the other carbon capture operations is they get the first part right. They do extract CO2 from the atmosphere. That's a good thing. But then they sell it to companies who immediately put the CO2 back in the atmosphere.
It's crazy,
It's
right?
quite amazing.
It's insanity.
Because we can turn that CO2 all the way back into the hydrocarbon fossil fuel that was burned to put the CO2 there in the first place. So it's better than fracking, it's better than tar sands, but it is not the solution. Our solution has to do with getting CO2 out of the atmosphere and never, ever letting it escape. That's the principle.
So converting it to things like carbon fiber, using it for construction.
There are literally dozens of products. There's an entire string of industries that we can clearly see what they're going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar, not just a multi-dollar business, but an entire cluster of businesses, because concrete's one whole business. There are various products. What can we do with the carbon fiber? Well, we could make electric cars, we could build cities, we could build planes and trains and boats and anything we can imagine, and we can 3D print them, as 3D printing is now coming online, and 3D printing is just as exciting as hell. We can even 3D print houses and villages using concrete accessed from the atmosphere. This is entirely doable.
So Andrew, where are you with this technology in terms of?
Where we stand with it right now? So
yes.
We're 5 years into the design of both the technologies and the business, what we call the venture engineering. The technology is ready to go. Our next step is prototyping. We haven't built anything yet. I personally, my beloved Connie and I have personally funded everything so far, and we didn't start out with much money, and we ended up with no money, so you know where that's at. So we're at the point where we've had lots and lots of offers of land and places, no shortage of places to do this. A lot of people love the idea. They say, you can do it here, and here is everywhere from Kenya to, we've literally got an offer outside of Nairobi. We've got probably the most interesting right now is in New Mexico, outside of Santa Fe. There's a college called the Santa Fe Community College that has an unbelievable facility, the Trades and Advanced Technologies Center, and we're collaborating with them, and I think we're going to build our prototypes down there in New Mexico. We've also had lots of offers here in Colorado, in California, all over the place.
So I want to extend an invitation. We have a global audience. Who knows? There may be somebody out there who's listening to this that is excited about the possibilities of these technologies. please get in touch,
Yeah.
and you'll be able to reach Andrew through his website, or you'll be able to get in touch with us through ours, and who knows what can happen.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's where we stand. The next step is literally to break ground, to build our first Enviroplex, this building with these multiple technologies, and fire it up and get it running. Do our what is called proof of concept. And and you just mentioned global here. During the recent Australian fires, we had a call from Australia. We have a friend who we know from a whole other world, from the spiritual realm, and she was over here visiting us. And I introduced her to this project of ours, and she's back in Australia, and the whole place is burning. And she got in touch and said, "Would your technology help here once we were going to have to rebuild after these 20 million acres have been destroyed?" And my answer was, "Yes, I believe so. Come on, I'm available. I'll jump on a plane right now and get myself to Australia. Let's do it." So I'm wide open to anything from anywhere. In fact, this country, there appears to be so much resistance at the highest levels to this kind of activity. It's quite amazing. But it could take a lot of people. We started a Patreon campaign, which is a crowdfunding campaign. That's one way of doing it without being dependent on any individual, any big money individual. But one big money individual is all it would take to do this. And we have a number of them right now looking at the project. I mean, literally every month we're sitting in meetings with people with massive resources. And nobody's actually said, "Here's your money, here's your check, let's get to work." We're waiting for that situation to unfold.
That's beautiful.
So that's where we stand. And then not only do we build the first one, but as we build the first one, we're designing the second one and the 10,000th one and the 100,000th one, because that's the way we have to think.
Well, and the idea with this is that it's modular. So it's easy to construct. It takes no time to construct. It's economical and it's functional. And how much carbon do you anticipate each module to be able to process? Like what kind of density of these Enviroplexes do you need to be able to address the carbon crisis in this?
All right, so that's a question a lot of people ask, and to be honest, we don't know we can't really run proper numbers on that. It's not that difficult to do. People say, well, you probably need to be in the most polluted places on Earth, don't you? You need to be in some filthy, horrific place where you can't see across the street because you'll capture more carbon more quickly. That is actually true. We've spent a lot of time down in Mexico City, one of the more polluted places on the planet. And I don't want to be breathing that air very much. And if you look at the numbers for Mexico City, it varies from about 450 parts per million to about 600 at rush hour traffic time. So, okay, so that's one of the questions is how much CO2 is there in the atmosphere? And if we're in New Mexico, we're probably looking at about 410 parts per million. Not a huge difference. So the only difference would be it's going to take a little bit longer. In other words, it depends on how many parts per million. If you're extracting 100% of the CO2 passing through your system, how much air are you moving? And we're not going to move air in some kind of industrial, loud, howling hurricane. We're just going to move air very gently. This whole process is going to be very human, very natural, very gentle. The first thing we're going to do, by the way, is there's a greenhouse vertical farm component. So the very first thing we do is extract a lot of CO2 by turning it into green growing material for food, for humans and for animals. We can create...
How do you envision powering the Enviroplex?
Okay, so I think you know the answer to that, but if you look at the picture of it, the south face and the east, south, and west faces are wrapped in photovoltaics. The peak of the building, it's a tall sloped building. At the peak, there are all these wind vanes, these wind turbines. So as much renewable as possible, and that does depend again on where we are. If there's geothermal, for example, there's an awful lot of electricity can be generated from under Mother Earth. If we're on a river, there could be hydro. So it really does depend, but it's going to be they're designed to be 100% off the grid. And I've just recently developed something that I call a synergy tower because it synergizes 4 or 5 different energy producing technologies. And it's a system designed for off-the-grid small communities, such as little co-housing villages, neighborhoods, and we can absolutely get completely off the grid. So we simply use everything. The answer to your question is we access everything that is locally available. Does that make sense?
It's brilliant. It's
And
absolutely brilliant.
You see, we don't have to, this isn't a massive machine. It's not like a freight train, you know, it's not this massive thing we have. All we've got to do is turn a number of carbon fiber fans. By the way, a carbon fiber fan blade uses 70% less energy than a steel one or an aluminum one. Can you believe that?
To produce.
It's light, it's rigid, it doesn't deteriorate. Metal ones have to be replaced every few years, on and on. So that's quite an extraordinary fact. So we're going to take CO2 out of the atmosphere, and the first thing we're going to make is the fan blades. We won't be able to do that at the very beginning, but we will move into that. Our very first product is going to be the fan blades. And all we have to do is turn those fan blades, and you and I could be turning those fan blades ourselves. We could have a handle at each end. We could be cranking away, and, you know, it's not that much power. So the building itself now, 50% of the building is actually real estate, because I recognize the need for cash flow. And so they could be used for residential, for hospital, for school, for elder care, for anything, for business centers, corporate headquarters, whatever. Those are going to need power. And so we've got to look at that as to what the sources of that power. But the ideal, the dream is that they be net zero, completely off the grid, completely locally serviced with all of our energy needs. And I totally believe we can do that. And there are new technologies coming out all the time. We're in touch with some crazy, amazing systems. And if they work as they're supposed to work, we're not going to be having this discussion.
We're at a transition point in so many ways. And if we're lucky, this crisis that we're in the midst of will skew us in the direction of being more aware of how interconnected we all are and the necessity for caring for our world in a different way. So hopefully that'll be an outcome of this. And people will be thinking differently because we'll have shocked all our basic assumptions. So hopefully that's what'll happen.
I think we're in major shock right now with the coronavirus thing. We're in this enforced retreat. It's time to stop and take a deep breath and rethink things, think things over and say, wait a minute, people, we were just insanely frenetically racing down the wrong path. People, do you agree? And if you do, well, how about doing something different? And we can do that.
I agree. I agree. No time like the present. I mean, this is a phenomenal opportunity to course correct.
Yep, here we are.
Unparalleled in human history, I think. It'll be very interesting to see what happens. I do want to ask you one other question, and I don't know if you'll consider it off topic. I am interested in your opinion of the carbon tax.
The carbon tax?
Yes, there's a bunch of people proposing carbon tax as a remediating effort for carbon pollution or carbon production.
Yeah, so I have to be honest, it's not my field, so I've thought about it. I'm somewhat aware of it. Let me say this. One of the very wealthy individuals that we just met with down in Santa Fe 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks ago now, not long ago indeed, right before this whole crisis hit, we had a 2-day meeting, and this gentleman is putting on the NASDAQ a carbon trading, what's it called, an index or something. And
interesting.
So it's the first publicly tradable carbon credit system, and that's about all I can tell you about it because I really don't know the mechanisms.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's said by many that this is something that could be useful and could be done, and if it's useful and can be done, I'm in favor. And he's a potential funder, so he was looking at our project and our team down there, and the only question now is with what's changing, like the economy has tanked radically in the last week. What's that going to do to this project and our funding channels? We don't know.
Yeah, no, we don't know. Everything
In the
is
great
pretty much
unknown.
up in the air.
Yep.
And actually, while we have the opportunity, we are in a place of deep uncertainty. And I just want to encourage people to realize that the predictability or the certainty that we always lived with was an illusion to begin with. Like the
Yeah.
truth is that we never ever knew what was going to happen next. And we do have the choice to imagine a beautiful future, as well as we have the choice to imagine a horrifying one. And so this is an opportunity for people that have a vision of a hopeful future to speak up, to be heard, to carry the light. Now we need you and your light more than ever. So please know that you matter, and you being one voice can make a powerful impact in the world. And so, Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do, Mira. So you just brought up the other subject. I'm the author, the co-author with Connie Baxter Marlowe of a book called The Trust Frequency, 10 Assumptions for a New Paradigm. It's about changing our fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality.
And I'm just going to interrupt you for a second to say we are definitely going to do another interview on that topic, because consciousness is fundamental to what
to our business venture. Consciousness is fundamental. Without a change in thinking, as Einstein said, we cannot solve the problems we created with a certain mindset without changing that mindset. So I can summarize the book in 4 words. Would you like to hear it?
Sure.
Trust the loving universe. Got it? That's independent of all religions and all spiritual paths. Simply, we live in a loving universe, and trust that. Trust yourself, trust your intuition, and trust Mother Nature and nurture Mother Nature, because we've been doing the opposite. It's time for that shift.
And it's ironic in this moment when things are so topsy-turvy to speak trust. But
we must. It's the single most important thing. We're here at Sunrise Ranch. This is a trust-based community of roughly 100 people, and we live on those principles.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for being with us. So grateful, and I look forward to our next conversation about the trust frequency. And for everyone listening, be well. That's it for now. Just live your best life. Love the world around you. And together we can save the world.
And be safe and look after yourself and your loved ones, because this is a trying time. So we'll come through it, friends.
Yes.
Thank you.
Blessings.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now. Visit sustainabilitynow.global to find resources related to today's program. While you're there, pledge your support by making a contribution to help us shape a world that works. And remember to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.